Hey everybody, welcome back to another video. Hope you guys been enjoying the content channel as of late. I've been just putting out a few videos here and there. I'm gonna be swamped at work, so excuse me if there might be another gap period where I just don't have any videos. I'm just gonna be swamped at work. So just Christmas week, so busy week, especially for people like me. I work at uh, FedEx, so it's very very busy. So, but but I want to talk about Avatar: Fire and Ash again, which we did a review. Me and my brother did a review for, um, and we have the numbers now coming in regarding how it's been performing, and there's a little bit of a caution of concern, but maybe not so much. So we'll examine this because Avatar Fire and Ash so far has collected about, I want to say 375, right? I want to say that's the global, yeah, 345. Sorry, 345. It's a global debut. Internationally, it did about 257 million, but here in the US, it did about 88 million, which is significantly lower compared to The Way of Water's domestic debut, which was 134 million. And just generally, also, it was a little bit of a noticeable decline from what The Way of Water had made. Now, when it comes to the Avatar films, it's always a weird variable at first when it comes to seeing the grosses, because these films usually operate on the longer game, right? It's not the initial debuts that kind of determine how things go. It ultimately comes down to the second weekends and their trajectory in the long run, right? So, for a lot of people, they're not going to immediately think that there's anything wrong. Um, but I have a weird feeling that there might be some things stacked against this that may actually hit this maybe more as a disappointment potentially at the end of the day. So, first things first, though, is laying out the groundwork. So, uh, production wise, we are looking at, according to Variety, we're looking at $350 million and roughly 150 million to promote it. So, as an entire package, this is a $500 million investment, which is huge. And according to my research, because we're going to talk about the way of water also here, just to give you some comparisons. Way of Water had also a very similar investment as well. So, there wasn't like a major jump in terms of production. Um, but but yeah, $500 million on the table for Fire and Ash, and opening to something of 300 and what was it, 345 million again? Yeah, 345 million. It may cause some concerns. So what I did is that I went and looked at the numbers for The Way of Water. I looked at the opening numbers there and then the second weekend numbers, and we're going to look at between the two, trajectories in terms of certain percentages and stuff like that, and see where we might end up being for Fire and Ash, and potentially we're in trouble. So let's look at this for a little bit here. So just to also to lay out the groundwork again, these numbers here, these are numbers squarely to do with that weekend. It's not about each individual day that led up to that day. I'm just squarely talking about Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. So just so we understand, um, because this number here is not the final number that ended up being for The Way of Water after 2 weeks. It was actually a lot higher. Apparently, it was like $850 million. So just so we understand, where things were. So, but as you can see, The Way of Water opened domestically to $134.1 million, whereas Fire and Ash only opened to $88 million. Internationally, Way of Water did 307.6 million, whereas Fire and Ash did 257. And then we're at a total of 441.6 million, whereas 345 for Fire and Ash. So there is a decline that is taking place. We're seeing less attendance happening on that front. So the second weekends, when we look at the Way of Water, we went from 134.1 to 56 million, which, according to my research, is about a 58% drop. So a little bit significant. But what held it up was the international market, which we saw maintain about 168.6 million, roughly a 42% drop, which is pretty good. So from that weekend alone, just talking about those specific days, not talking about all the other days that were collected that made it so to $800 million, $224.6 million was made off the second weekend. So, and then eventually, once you add up those two, just strictly on those weekends, $666.2 million was made. And then beyond that, obviously, with other days that were attributed, that's when we eventually got to $850 million after 2 weeks of the Way of Water, just generally speaking. So now let's look at Fire and Ash. So if we look at, and I'm going to be very fair here, I'm going to use the exact same percentages that took place with the Way of Water, break that down, and see where we may be at. So again, only talking about the second weekend, basically what would be the next days? The 26th to the 28th. So we're going to consider those days. So once those days are done, 58% after $88 million, we're looking at $51.04 million, which is not that concerning, especially when you look at the domestic weekend that happened on the second weekend with the Way of Water, roughly around the same. So nothing too concerning there. Internationally, it seems like we're taking a little bit of a step down though. 107.94 million compared to the 168.6 million, so it's a little bit more significant of a drop. That's almost like 50 million or so. So after it's all said and done, if you were to look at it just from that comparison, Fire and Ash could potentially make about $158.98 million off of its second weekend, which again is not in consideration of the other days that are also being packed on that lead up to that weekend. As it stands, just those two numbers in consideration, we could see 503.98 million, potentially as high as maybe 600, or let's say even maybe $700 million. As it stands, when you consider all that, there's about $100 million decrease from what the Way of Water was doing to now. And considering the production that is at hand here, which again is about roughly the same as the Way of Water is, it does bring about a question of, does this do well? And we have to remember also, ticket sales are not going immediately to the studios, right? There's cuts that take place between the theaters and the studios. Up front, usually, the opening weekends, the studios will make up the larger sums. So for Disney's case, with the 345, they probably made about maybe 250 or maybe as high as 300, which I doubt it. Probably more like 250 or so. And moving forward to the next weekends here and there, those percentages get lower and lower until eventually they're now evenly split between 50 and 50, at least as far as I've read. Or at least that's the idea, So with that, and considering the investment as it stands, realistically, when you think about it, this film has to do as good as the other two films did. This is not a film that needs to do at least $1 billion. It has to make at least $1 billion for Disney, as the same as The Way of Water did, but it has to do $2 billion because of all the cuts that take place between the theaters and the studios, they have to make a lot of money. So this film has to still rein in around similar numbers that The Way of Water did, that the original film did. This basically has to be, once again, one of the highest grossing films of all time in order to justify the entire investment. Because let's say that Fire and Ash only makes about a billion or like 1.5 billion, right? Which is where it needs to be, which is what Disney needs to make, right? Disney doesn't make all that money. So they probably, at the end of the day, if that is the case, for Fire and Ash, if it were to make $1.5 billion, they probably make up about maybe $700 million of that global gross, which is not good for them, especially with a major investment that's $500 million. That would not be a good thing. Also, another thing to consider is that reception is not really in favor for this film. A lot of people are kind of mediocre on it, not a whole lot of love for it. Um, so it's, as far as I can tell anyway. I mean, there hasn't been a large, you know, a large reception to this compared to The Way of Water. There was a little bit more attention that was given on that, whereas this, it seems like there was just kind of responses. Um, so more or less like mixed, we'll say. Um, so there's also that you have to consider as well, which greatly can affect box office. Um, so what it really comes down to for this, I think, is the second weekend. I think it's really going to be like it really depends on how the international market takes to this film, how they take to it on the second weekend. And because really they're the reason why these films kind of push themselves into those larger tiers, why they end up making a billions or $2 billion. It's mostly to do with people in China and these other foreign regions. Here in the US, not really. So it's really in there. It's really in up to them and seeing what happens in the next weekend. But I do have trepidations once again. I mean, The Way of Water I had trepidations for also, but I was proven wrong. So hopefully I'm proven wrong here, especially this time because Disney needs a win. They've had two wins basically this year, three really, which was Lilo and Stitch, Zootopia 2, and Freakier Friday. All their Marvel properties have flopped, amongst other things that flopped as well. So they really need another hit on their hands. So hopefully this is another one for them. But like I was illustrating, just by where things are right now, financially, and also just the investment itself, just by also just the year in general, just by how this year has gone, because when The Way of Water came out, we were in the midst of a pandemic, and also we were also like slowly coming out of that. So mentalities were different at that time. People have now, gone back to normal livings. COVID is still a thing, but it's a seasonal thing. Um, but it's different now. The spirit is different. People are more fatigued. People are very selective about what they will or will not invest into, and interest can drop very quickly. So just because it hits well up front does not mean that it will do well later on. So, or that spirit will carry over. So we will see. We will see what happens with this. It ultimately is going to be on the next weekend, and we'll talk more about it when the box office recap, when we'll see where things are for this film and ultimately if it's a success or not. But given also the the time windows between the two films also, because The Way of Water was like 20 years later, so there's a lot more interest that would have been built up over that time for another film, whereas with this is 2 or 3 years later after The Way of Water. So there's also that you have to consider as well. There's more awareness to Avatar than there was with when The Way of Water came out, which felt you know uh, more like a revival than where we are right now, which is just another part of this now developed series. So we'll see. I mean, we'll see where we end up, but I have my suspicions that it will. I do believe that it will hit its highs. I will believe that it will join the $1 billion club. It will become $1 billion thing. But that does not mean that it's a good thing when you consider ticket sales, when you consider all these other factors that I've laid out. We might be seeing a disappointment here. I would not be surprised. But then again, I was wrong in the past, so maybe, who knows? But we'll have to wait and see. So I'm just doing this now, just so and if something were to occur, with this, I feel like there is potential for it to go downhill, or the percentages could be sharper. Who knows? Mainly just by the spirit of how movies are today. I don't. I have my doubts, on this, but you guys, let me know. Do you guys feel like Fire and Ash is going to have strong legs coming into the next few weeks? Do you guys feel like it's going to get as high as the other films were? It has to. I mean, just financially, it has to. It has to make about $2 billion in order to, once you can take into consideration the cuts, between theaters and studios, to get to that $1 billion that the film needs to do in order to break even. It has to do about double of what the film grow in terms of a gross has to make. So if it has to make $1 billion for the company to see a return on investment, the film itself overall has to do $2 billion, right? So we'll see. We'll see. But let me know all your thoughts relating to Avatar in the comment section below. And that's gonna be it for this video, guys. Thank you guys for joining. And until then, I will catch you guys in the next video. And happy holidays. Hopefully you guys have a safe holiday season. And I'll catch you guys next time. Bye.